Welcome back to Humanism Now. I'm your host, James Hodgson. In this bonus episode of the podcast, I wanted to invite back Nathan Stilwell from Humanists UK, who joined us about a year ago to discuss what was at the time a bill going through Parliament on the legalisation of assisted dying. That bill has since passed, but of course that has not yet come into law, and there's been quite a lot of discussion since then in the news. So I wanted to invite Nathan back onto the show just to give an update on the bill, the objections, the conversation which is happening, and what happens next, and of course, how you, listeners, can get involved and support. So Nathan, welcome back to Humanism Now.
Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, so last year, the bill passed the House of Commons. And for many bills, both government bills and private members' bills, which is when an individual MP, an individual politician tries to change the law, that's normally the biggest hurdle. The biggest hurdle is getting the democratically elected politicians to say, yes, we support that bill. So the bill passed all of its stages in the Commons. It passed by an absolute majority and then goes to essentially the House of Lords, where normally they're known as like the scrutinizing chamber. So they're meant to be looking at kind of the bill in intense detail and looking at any fine tuning, any issues that still need to be hashed out. So many people heard the bill passed. We've already had reports of terminally ill people and going to their, hospital, going to the hospital saying, I would like an assisted death, thinking that the law has already changed. But actually, it's still in the House of Lords. And what has happened is over 1,100 amendments, so proposed changes to the bill, have been put forward, mostly by members of the House of Lords known as peers, who are against the bill, who there was no changes that we could make to the bill ever that would alleviate what their concerns are or put the bill into a shape that they would support. So our point of view very much is that many of these amendments, if not a massive majority of these amendments, are actually pretty egregious, are not actually looking at safety or looking at changes or looking at process, but actually intentionally designed to slow down the debate. And a really important point is all bills in Parliament, essentially during what's known as the parliamentary session, they have to pass all stages. So they have to go through all of these sections of the debate. Now, we know now that the end of the parliamentary session will be about May, June, and the bill has to be finished by then. And if it's not finished by then, it simply fails. Without a vote, without anything like that, the bill just fails. And at the moment, it's looking very possible that after everything we've been through, the bill could potentially fail by not passing it through its stages because of all of these amendments that have been put forward.
So just to give it, put it into perspective, you said there's over 1,000 amendments that are being put forward. Typically, how many amendments are put forward at this stage when a bill goes through Parliament?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell. Like there are some private members' bills that have literally passed the stage without amendments or about one or two. Yeah, and there's bigger bills in the Parliament than the assisted dying bill. There's huge bills that sometimes these huge bills, like things like the Online Safety Act, really big health bills, have already 1,000 amendments. Isn't crazy, but 1,000 amendments for a 52-page bill, which is called the assisted dying bill, is crazy. And if you look at, for example, amendments per page, the assisted dying bill has about 22 amendments per page at the moment. Now, for the next biggest bill, with if we're drawing equivalents, the next biggest one has 5 amendments per page. So we really are talking like for the bill, this is a huge, insane number of amendments that are just going to be impossible to debate in the time that we've got.
Yeah. So could you give us some examples of some of the amendments which are possibly more frivolous that are really holding up the process?
Yeah, absolutely. So the one that's been cited the most is a pregnancy test for all applicants. So that would literally mean men over the age of 65 would have to give a negative pregnancy test in order to be able to access an assisted death. There's also been a mandatory visit to a geriatrician. Now, obviously the clear majority of people are going to be over the age of 65. They can be terminally ill. They would live the full life. But we know internationally that, for example, in Victoria, Australia, 15% of applicants were under the age of 65. There will be 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who will have a terminal illness and seek an assisted death. So to force them to go to a geriatrician is quite frankly ridiculous. We've also seen amendments such as banning anybody any applicant from leaving the country in the final 12 months of their lives. So, anybody doing a bucket list, visiting family abroad, seeking medical treatment abroad, any reason they've left the country in 12 months prior to applying, they would be banned from applying. So these are sort of amendments that we're pointing out, being like, they're clearly ridiculous. They clearly don't invite good scrutiny or good debate. Those are the ones I point out as being designed to really slow down the process.
But I think one of the main concerns and criticisms prior to the bill passing and since has been the level of scrutiny and criticism and debate. I just wonder what your view is on that. And also, what do you feel are the more legitimate, either amendments that are being proposed or debates that still need to take place before any bill were to come into effect?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, a solid argument has been that this is a private member's bill, meaning it's an individual politician trying to change the law rather than the government as a whole. Yeah. And when the government tries to change the law, they do a lot of what's called pre-legislative scrutiny. So they do consultations, they do research and everything like that. And a core argument has been that hasn't been done for this private member's bill, which in one sense is true, but in the other sense, there has been so much research into assisted dying. Parliament has done a crazy amount of research into assisted dying. Literally the same year the bill was introduced, there was an inquiry into assisted dying by the Health and Social Care Committee that had something like 63,000 responses from the public, 300, 400 bits of written evidence, days of oral evidence sessions. And I would really quite strongly argue that assisted dying has probably had more pre-legislative scrutiny than probably, I would say, most bills that are put forward in Parliament. And then if we look at the scrutiny that this specific bill has had, it had nearly 100 hours. In fact, I think it had more than 100 hours of debate in the Commons, which again is extraordinary. Most bills in the Commons don't have as much as 100 hours of scrutiny of looking into them already. So already by the time it's reached the Lords, it's already had a really intense amount of kind of scrutiny. That also means like the public and commentators reading the bill, looking at the bill, evidence from experts essentially provided to the bill. So I'd say it's been one of the most intensively scrutinized bits of legislation we've ever had. Now, that doesn't mean that laws doesn't have a role. Like the way that this has gone through Parliament means that both a small committee of MPs and all MPs on a whole have suggested changes to it. And certain of those changes individually work, but when they're put together, they don't. So a key example is at the report stage, which is the one before the final stage in the Commons, an MP called Naz Shah put forward an amendment trying to stop essentially people with eating disorders from accessing assisted dying, or people, for example, refusing food and drink before they have their assisted death to try and make them meet that threshold. Now, I'm not going to debate whether I think that's a good idea or not, but the majority of MPs supported it, so that's in the bill. But the way that it's worded, I think, could potentially stop someone who's terminally ill, who has a reduced appetite. It's very common for elderly people or terminally ill people to have a very reduced appetite, especially in the last days, weeks, months of their lives. So that's something that I think is really important. Okay, it's absolutely important that the Lords look at that amendment. They look if they can change the wording. And in fact, amendments to that have been put down to change that wording. So that's an example of it. Like it is entirely legitimate that the Lords look at this process and say, can a terminally ill person get through it? Are we balancing safety with the fact that the person trying to apply is going to be terminally ill, is going to be dying, but by definition? And that's a really important and difficult balancing act. So that's entirely legitimate. But I don't think a pregnancy test for men example meets that threshold of being legitimate.
And I remember at the time when this was going through that it was one of the rare occasions that there was a lot of commendment for how this was debated in Parliament. And people were saying this is the UK House of Commons and parliamentary system at its best because members of Parliament were permitted to speak freely, oftentimes very emotionally, frankly, and openly. And it was really quite a compelling debate to watch.
Yes. And I think that the House of Lords has already received quite a lot of criticism with how they've conducted their debate. And in fact, there was a debate last Thursday about giving this bill more time to make sure that it can get that scrutiny, it can pass. And during that debate, several members of the House of Lords stood up and said, our reputation is being hurt by this. And again, it's not only the amendments, but like during the debate, I would say we hadn't seen the same quality of debate. Lord Farmer, for example, firstly, he called it an atheist bill. You know, this is a bill for only people who don't believe in God because for X, Y, and Z reasons. And then in a different debate, that same Lord mentioned, I think it was Caroline Flack, Goebbels after the Nuremberg trials and Jeffrey Epstein all in the same sentence talk about people who are dying by suicide. I don't know how you can say that's legitimate scrutiny. I don't know how you can say that's a debate that's necessary whilst debating this really important issue. So I would say that it actually, where we are right now, has probably harmed the reputation of the House of Lords. And what many Lords are saying is, please don't harm our reputation further. Please conduct this debate with the same seriousness and importance as the debate has been in the Commons.
What needs to happen now in order for the bill to pass? So there's obviously these over 1,000 proposed amendments. Does each one need to be debated individually? How do we get to a point by May where this bill can pass as has been approved already?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most difficult, and it's a question that's being posed right now. So amendments are grouped together into these groups where they can be debated effectively. And so far, there's been 84 groups of amendments. And each debate through the House of Lords has said we get through at least 10 of these groups that are done around subjects around should the court be involved or should be eligible and things like that. But each debate, we get through about 2 to 4 groups. So clearly just incredibly slowly. So some of the things that have been put forward is making larger groups. It is grouping these into, okay, what are the big issues? Let's debate them together so we can get the next stage. There's also been the idea that the debate just goes on a lot longer. So at the moment, the debate has to be on a Friday. It starts at 10 a.m. It finishes at 3 p.m. And so obviously one solution is simply to start a lot earlier and potentially say, look, we're going to hit this group and we're going to debate until we hit this group. We're going to reach this milestone. And if we end up debating until 2, 3 a.m., so be it. And I mean, there's already been a lot of kind of backlash to that, but that is actually how the House of Commons works. Like, it's not at all extraordinary for the House of Commons to sit late in the night to be able to get through everything that they need to get through. And if they need to do that for the assisted dying bill, I think, especially if you were talking, for example, for a terminally ill person, they'd be saying, yeah, I think the Lord should be working hard to get this bill through. This is incredibly important to me. And therefore, I think it's worth the kind of political time that's spent on it.
And for the people that this bill impacts the most, those who are hoping or potentially waiting for an assisted death in the UK, if this doesn't pass by the deadline, what does that mean both practically for the bill and those who are waiting for it, but also constitutionally? I don't know that it's common that bills that pass in the House of Commons then are at the system at the Lords stage, or whether that causes quite an issue.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, talking about the terminally ill people, the people this bill is for, I spoke to a woman called Hannah Slater recently. She's a 30-year-old mum of one, but she has a terminal cancer and she wants this bill for herself. She says that she doesn't want to die, but she doesn't want her death to be full of pain and suffering, and therefore having that right to choose would allow her to focus on the now, focus on her son and focus on what's important rather than worrying about death. And so this bill for people like Hannah is massively important. It is incredibly important, in fact. But what happens if it fails? Again, that's the biggest question that's being posed at the moment. Quite literally, the bill just has to be, if it fails, it has to be reintroduced. A new politician has to say, look, I'm going to try again and see what mechanisms are available for it. But what it means constitutionally, I think this is already leading to people questioning the House of Lords. It's something that we as humanists have already called for a while. There are 26 bishops who sit by right. They're Church of England bishops, by the way, so only representing one denomination of Christianity who sit in the House of Lords. There's already a bill going through to get rid of the hereditary peers, so literally politicians who it's through the male bloodline is how they sit in the House of Lords. So there are already these questions of legitimacy. I genuinely honestly feel that if the assisted dying bill fails, the questioning of that legitimacy is going to be louder and more people are going to question why we have a huge group, 850 unelected peers, choosing how we die and making that decision for us. I think that's why so many members of the House of Lords have already stood up and said, look, this is really hurting our reputation. And if we block this, and again, what makes it almost more egregious is not blocking it for a vote. It's not like they're coming together and saying, we're blocking this. It's blocking it using procedure. Essentially, it's what we would say is game playing in a way to stop what is a popular bill, is what the public wants to support from going through.
And if anybody listening would like to support the bill further and assist with your work, how can they contact you and what's the best way to get involved?
Absolutely. This is what's also already difficult is members of the House of Lords aren't used to being contacted. It's not like you have a Lord in the same way that you have an MP. So that makes it more difficult. So we at Humanists UK have developed a tool so you can go onto our website and you can find a member of the House of Lords and you can write to them and say, assisted dying is important to me. I want this bill to pass. And I think that public pressure is actually really important, right? Is the members of the House of Lords aren't used to hearing from the public in this way. And so it's really important that public pressure says, we're watching, we're listening, we really want this to pass, and it's important for me that this passes. I think at the moment, that's one of the most important things you can do. I will say that this has been incredibly hard work. We've had to go through all 1,100 amendments and look at them and look at our view on them and recommend where we think they should pass it there, which takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. So even a small donation helps in that effort, helps in that work that needs to be done in order to make sure that this bill is safe, but also just at this point passes. Like it's really important you really have to put yourself in the shoes of a terminally ill person right now, watching this debate, watching the potential of the Lords filibustering it or stopping it. And we have to build that public pressure. Otherwise, there is no chance that the law will change.
Well, Nathan, thank you so much again for your hard work. Do wish you all the best with your campaigning, and we'll include links to everything in the show notes. But great to see you back again. And hopefully we'll invite you back for a third time, maybe to discuss a different topic.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening to Humanism Now. If you liked the show, please leave us a review. It helps more people find us. Support us from just £5 a month for exclusive content and to shape future episodes, and we'll plant a tree each month in your name. Follow us on all socials at Humanism Now Pod and help spread curiosity, compassion, and human progress. Humanism Now is produced by Humanize Live, creating world-class podcasts, videos, and events for purpose-led individuals and organizations. Learn more at humanize.live.